Okay, thank you. Um, so today we'll just be chatting about an updated evidence base on digital media and young children. And so I'll just get started. These are my conflicts of interest. I'm currently supported through some NIH grants and Reach Out and Read Michigan Medical Director and serve as an ambassador for the American Academy of Pediatrics Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health, and then completed a paid consulting project in the past year for PBS Kids. These are our learning objectives for today. So I'd like to start by sharing this quote from the World Health Organization, where, if we change the beginning of the story, we change the whole story. So as pediatricians, we really operate on the precept that these early life years are so foundational for a child's development, and it represents this important window of opportunity to lay down these key critical foundations of health and well-being that can really last a lifespan. And so when we think about those key foundational elements, we think about these strands of development, which include social emotional development, language, cognition, and physical development. And I'll talk about these strands of development and how digital media is interwoven into these strands to create this real tapestry for kids. And so kids are not just a product of their genetic makeup. They're not a product only of their environment, but really a blending of these two. And these strands really intersect in a lot of different ways and are intertwined in a lot of different ways. So I'd like to start out by zooming out and thinking about digital media as a whole, and why this topic feels really hard, why it feels really challenging for families, and why it also feels really triggering for families. When we were all growing up, for the most part, the available screen time really was TV in the family room. You could turn it on and off. There was programming that happened at specific hours of the day, and it was limited. Once you were done watching, you're like, well, there's no other cartoon for me to watch. I'm just going to turn this off. But now digital media is so much more expansive, immersive, and interactive. It's a part of our classrooms. It's a part of our playgrounds. It's shaping values of what we consider to be worthy. And it's really handheld, and it can occupy a lot of other interpersonal spaces. So it can interfere or disrupt some of the interactions we have together and make it harder for us to feel connected. At the same time, the access to digital devices can serve as a line of connection to other people. And what we saw as part of the COVID pandemic is that access to a laptop really allowed for kids to be able to connect to their classrooms and learn. And really, the way that digital media is designed may or may not fit in with children's well-being. And part of it is the way that digital media are designed. When it's designed for an understanding of how children move through the world, it really can be associated with some positive outcomes. But the digital design that most kids encounter on the day-to-day are really fueled by a business model that wants you to engage more and scroll more on your phones and is collecting your data. And so those things are just a mismatch for what kids need when they're growing up. And so I also wanted to share this quote here from Nobel laureate Gabriela Mistral, that many things can wait, but kids can't. Now is the time his bones are being formed, her blood is being constituted, the brain is being developed. And so we really can't say you can wait another day for us to generate the evidence base on digital media. We really need to act now and have some clinical tools in our toolkit as pediatricians, when families come to us with big questions. And so for our kids and our patients now, their name is really today. And so we kind of want to act quickly because the questions that parents are asking us about digital media sometimes feel really pressing. So just a note, so what is the current state of the science on digital media and children's development? We are kind of limited by some of our scientific evidence. It's not like the most high quality, when we think of our EBM pyramid, the very tippy top of the pyramid is really randomized controlled trials. And there are very few randomized controlled trials in digital media research, because we can't just be like, you watch more, YouTube kid and you watch more X, Y, or Z. There have been some similar studies that have randomized, young kids to watching more high-paced, active media compared to more slow-paced media. But as a general rule, it's just not ethical to randomize them into different groups like that. And so many studies are observational, and also a lot of studies use the duration of screen time as its variable of choice. But we know that, screen media today is not just about screen time. It's about what kids are watching. It's about who's in the room with that child, and it's about who that child is. So it really ignores a lot of other really important facets of screen media. And so these kinds of variables also, it might not account for other really important factors that we know can shape development, like access to extracurricular activities, parents who have the bandwidth to provide supportive parenting, and then a neighborhood that they can safely play outside. So these are all things that can funnel into similar kind of child developmental outcomes, but are often not as robustly accounted for in the literature. The general kind of big picture overview of these observational studies are that more time spent on screens in the young child age is associated with less optimal language development, social emotional development, and cognitive development. But those associations are small, and it's possible that they're bidirectional too, and it's not just screens equals more language challenges or more social emotional developmental challenges. And so there are really these other important aspects to consider, including the content of what kids are watching, the context, and then the child individual differences that I'll talk through as well. Okay, before I move on to our first strand of development, any questions about that or any comments? Great. I think, if you guys have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to jump in or comments. It's always better when I'm talking less, it's better for your learning and better for everybody involved. So, okay, so we're going to start off with social emotional development. Emotional development really wires the architecture of the brain in response to a child's early experiences. It's really starts with infants and young children interacting over periods of time with a trusted caregiver. And when a newborn infant is born, as you guys know, they're legally blind. And so they really can't see very far, but they can see about 8 to 10 inches in front of their vision. So when a new parent holds their newborn infant for the first time, they hold them at a distance that infant can actually see their face, even though they can't see very much else. And so there's a lot of neurologic wiring where kids are socially wired, and it's a part of their neurobiological architecture. But kids don't develop in a vacuum, they develop really in the context of their caregivers. They're the relational gatekeepers that are the engines of social emotional development, in addition to all these other strands of development. So social emotional development is really the connection to language development and cognition as well. There's really a lot of, it's not just about the kids, it's about the parents and caregivers as well. And so we'll talk more about that as we go on. So just a brief overview on some of the social emotional signs that you might witness in your young patients. Social emotional development really is about kind of how do you calm yourself? How do you soothe yourself? And how do you plan for things? These systems are essentially like the brain's air traffic control system. And in infancy, infants have very little skills to be able to calm themselves. They can shift their attention or avert their gaze. They can sometimes suck their fingers to self-soothe, but that's really about it. They're really 100% almost dependent on their caregivers for self-regulation. In the toddler years, their toddlers are they are tricky, as a mom of toddlers myself, they have a hard time with delaying gratification, but they're just starting to do so. They have big emotions that adults need to help them with. And in the preschool years, they're just starting to kind of understand early empathy and understand theory of mind of like what's going on in this person's brain, but they need a lot of adult support still. So what are the associations between digital media and social emotional development? So what we know from meta-analyses in the literature is that greater digital media duration at ages 3 and 5 is associated with greater internalizing behavior later on at ages 5 and 7. And so internalizing behaviors are kind of like your anxiety, kind of mood symptoms, negative affect. And so sometimes greater digital media duration is associated with has longitudinal associations with these internalizing behaviors. And then specific to the actual tablet use, so most studies done kind of examine screen media duration, like with TV time and tablet time. But this in particular, this was a study that they conducted that was examining specifically tablets. So they found that tablet use at 3.5 years of age predicted heightened expressions of anger at 4.5 years of age. And that in turn predicted greater tablet use at 5.5 years of age. So there's these tricky kind of like, like maybe their 3.5 years of age is really, or 4.5 years of age is really foundational time, for kids to develop self-soothing skills, and when that's not happening, they get more tablet use kind of in the future. So there's something about the child too that's contributing to these associations. Yeah.
Do we know if there's been like a subset of patients with autism or ADHD that were studied with this?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So we did one study that was a qualitative study of school-age children with autism, and we interviewed them and their parents, and we found that it was just harder for them. Like kids with autism have stickier brains. They really gravitate towards very specific content, and also they have a hard time settling their bodies a little bit. There's so much in the environment that their brains are picking up on that they can feel overwhelmed by it. But when you have a screen, it's really kind of making it's more predictable, and it can be in an area of content that they enjoy more, and it might be able to help them get into a restaurant, whereas like pre-screens they wouldn't have been able to tolerate being in a restaurant. And so yeah, there's these really tricky associations. It's just harder for families to navigate in general, and it's and for our patients, like we have to be a little bit more rigid about the rules around kind of screen media. But there's not enough research. We do know that for both kids with ADHD and autism, there's an increased risk for problematic media use behaviors. And for kids with ADHD, their brains are a little bit more, they have a harder time controlling their impulses. And so of course they're gonna reach for the thing that's gonna be seamless and frictionless to be able to play. They also have a harder time with learning disabilities sometimes. There's an increased incidence of learning disability among kids with ADHD. And so they might feel a sense of competence, when they're playing a video game and they're advancing through the levels, that they might not feel that same level of competence in school. So you're exactly right. I think there's these predisposing factors that are really important to consider when you're screening patients for digital media use. And that was actually the perfect question for this slide. We know that kids with more temperamental reactivity, they might be exposed to greater screen media. And so we know that infants with difficult temperament, at age 9 months, they actually watch more TV. Probably because their parents are exhausted. Those infants are colicky, they're hard to soothe, the 5S's don't work. The parents are up at 3 a.m. trying to order whatever it is that they think is like marketed towards kids with colic. And so the families are really left with very minimal supports, and so they have to figure out what works for soothing their kid with difficult temperament. And then again, we find that greater internalizing and externalizing behaviors at age 3 are directionally associated with greater digital media use at age 5. And the associations are likely bidirectional. So there's something about the kids that might lead to greater screen media use, and it's not just about digital media. So I'll share this is around the content of digital media use. There's a lot of positives actually, positive associations where kids can learn a lot of social emotional skills, especially when the content is pro-social and is really vetted by kids themselves. So for PBS Kids, they have teams of child developmental experts at every stage of the process. So they'll actually have these drawing boards and they'll draw out a storyline and then bring it to a focus group of kids and show them like, oh, this is what's happening with Big Bird. Like, what do you think is going on here? And if the kids are not getting those concepts, they actually scrap the storyboard and they literally go back to the writing table and they redraw it. And so it's this like iterative process of involving kids early on in the design process that helps them shape, what the shows look like. And so they really put in a lot of thought and care into the storylines and how kids learn and move through the world. One study just came out from PBS Kids where they actually asked, so Daniel Tiger has been out and about in the world for the last probably 10 to 15 years, and they actually interviewed teens of the first cohort of kids who watched Daniel Tiger. And those teens actually indicated they still use some of the skills for self-soothing that they learned from Daniel Tiger. So it really can have a meaningful impact for kids on the long term. And then we know that certain calming apps can also help promote social emotional skills. But those are really designed with a really very specified learning goal of helping kids do some deep breathing when they're feeling more of those big emotions. So when digital design meets the way that children like to move through the world, there can be really a lot of positive associations for their learning and development. But unfortunately, a lot of online content was not designed with children's well-being in mind. And so I just like to share a few examples. This was a data set of 1,500 kids, 150 kids sent in 10 videos each. And so there were 1,500 videos of YouTube links that they actually watched themselves, like their parents cut and paste the last 10 videos that they watched and sent it in. And we watched some of those videos as a part of this project. And so this video here is a really popular gamer called Flamingo. Unfortunately, there was a lot of interpersonal violence. So he was asking, it was a live stream gaming Roblox situation where he was asking other people to bully another player. And so in this study that I wasn't a part of, they found that about 20% of YouTube videos watched by children 0 to 8 contained interpersonal violence, like bullying or making fun of a person. 30% of videos watched by young children had violent content, like shown in this screenshot. And then 20% of videos contained ads that were inappropriate for kids. So this was not a violent YouTube video that child had watched, but this was the ad that popped up. And so even though kids might not be, the algorithm is feeding kids this content, the kids themselves are kind of looking through YouTube. And so even if they're not actively seeking out this content, it's popping up and coming to their feed. And then one other piece to this work is that they found about more than half of the videos had some sort of commercialized content, like toy unboxing videos or things that just made kids wish they had more of whatever it was that they were showing in life, be it candy or toys or experiences. And also there were some racial and ethnic inequities in how the characters on YouTube were portrayed. And so we did an offshoot of that study where we watched the videos and coded for race and ethnicity of the characters. And we we found that videos with prominent BIPOC characters were also more likely to include interpersonal violence or bad language or drinking, drugs, and smoking. And so really these types of depictions could make kids more biased against BIPOC individuals. So just to summarize those slides, we know that violent media content is associated with more externalizing behaviors, especially for young boys. So in randomized control trials where kids were exposed to even just fast-paced content, they were more likely to experience more aggression and more hyperactive behaviors following exposure to that content as compared with more slow-paced kind of learning-based content. So I'm just going to shift and move into some more of the context of what we know about digital media. And it's not just, when we're thinking about development, obviously it's not just about the kids. It's so much of that, that rests on the parents. So parents shoulder a huge responsibility in terms of that child's development. And what we know about parents is that how they use their mobile devices around kids really matters, because mobile devices are designed, the business model is designed to be engaging, absorbing. I love my phone. Like I could spend hours on it. And so, but that can sometimes come at the expense if you're using it a lot around kids. It can make it hard to pay attention to what kids are saying or asking, or pay attention to those social cues. And so I'm guilty of this too. Like my daughter has once turned my head like this and was like, Mom, look at me, and so I'm like, oh, I need to put away my phone. But it's really designed to be engaging, and so we never want to parent shame. Like parents need their phones to connect with the world, and but also we need to reflect on kind of how we're using our phones and whether or not it could be interfering with children's development and that important parent-child relationship. So these mobile device disruptions, kind of day to day, are called technoference, and it's associated with increased parent stress. So it might be that parents are really stressed, and so they need to retreat to their phones to unwind a little bit, but then it makes it harder for them to attend to their kids, and so that can create some friction in the parent-child relationship. And that has been found to be associated with greater child externalizing behavior. So more of that child kind of acting out behaviors or aggressive behaviors or hyperactive behaviors. So that's one big and important piece that's kind of emerged in the literature over the last few years. Another really important piece is that for kids especially who are a little bit trickier, they're harder to soothe. When they use media to soothe those kids especially, it can supplant those opportunities to learn skills to soothe themselves apart from using digital media. So this was not, there's bidirectional associations between use of media for soothing and becoming more temperamentally reactive, more further down the line. But these associations are really true for these kids that are just a little trickier, and more temperamentally reactive. So I just wanted to share, this was some of our earlier work where we actually invited parents and toddlers to the lab, and we set it up like a normal living room, and we had 3 different types of objects for parents and kids to engage with, because we wanted to test, how is it that parents and kids are interacting over tablet devices. And so we had, I don't know if you guys have ever read Mercer Mayer, the little critter books, but we had 3 different little critter books, and we had them on a tablet with all the bells and whistles, a lot of features, like it was making sound effects. We had it on a basic tablet device with just page turning capabilities. And then we had it on a print book, and we kind of randomized the order of when kids got what. And we actually had parents grab it from a little ledge and return back to the couch to look at the object or book together. And then we video recorded families and then coded for different types of behaviors that we saw. So this is just to orient you to this slide. On the x-axis, you'll see a lot of the behaviors that we coded for. And on the y-axis, you'll see the frequency of how often that behavior happened in a 5-minute reading period with their child. And so on the blue here, this is the tablet with all the bells and whistles. This is the yellow. The yellow is a basic tablet that just had mostly page turning capabilities. And then the gray is the print book. And so we actually hadn't planned to code for these things, but as we were watching the videos, we were just curious about some families seem to have a hard time interacting over the tablet device. Like it was creating more conflict when parents and kids were trying to interact over the tablet device that we weren't noticing on the print book. And so we wanted to capture like, what are some of those nonverbal behaviors that might lead to some of this like interpersonal friction? So we looked for child escape was essentially the child either closing the book or closing the app on the tablet. That just happened a little bit more with both of the tablet apps. Child grabbing the book, that happened. It was the same throughout. But child intercept, this was like we defined it as the child swatting the parent's hand away from the book. That happened a little bit more with the tablet devices as compared with the book. And then the parents also swatted their children's hand away from the tablet device more than the book. You know, that almost rarely happened in the book condition. And then kids in the basic tablet condition, they were turning their bodies away from their parents like this. And parents were also doing the same for their kids as compared to to either the more kind of bells and whistles tablet versus the print book. And then these solitary spaces, we define this as like when a kid kind of tries to hoard the tablet for themselves, and we're creating spaces that made it hard for the parents to engage. You know, when you think about a book, it really brings out like these warm, nestly, cuddly behaviors between a parent and a child. And it just feels really like cozy. But we didn't notice that happening as much with the tablet devices. It was just creating more of these solitary spaces, probably because it was designed to be a personal device. And so really, this really shed light for me, at least, that a lot of the design elements of a tablet just make it sometimes harder for parents to feel connected with their toddlers, at least to the degree that they might with a book. So more about this, you know, some more emerging literature on kind of digital media and social emotional development is that this sensitive caregiving piece is really critically important. Strong relationships can help weather any future challenges or storms that are related to digital media use in the future. And when parents have these more open-ended, autonomy supportive digital media conversations, those are things like asking open-ended questions, helping kids navigate the digital world, but in a non-judgmental way. That was associated with reduced likelihood of problematic internet use among adolescents. And we also know that there's this nice body of literature that shows that joint media engagement, you know, when parents watch together and talk and teach and help transfer the content from the 2D screen to the 3D world, that's actually associated with better kind of child developmental outcomes. But that's really hard because families are stressed. You know, most American families work so hard. It's they just don't have kind of the supportive social kind of safety nets around them, and so families feel really stressed with caring for their kids and managing their house and going to work and trying to provide enough for their families. And so they often need to use digital media as a way for kids to unwind at the end of the day because they need to get other things done. And that's okay too, but you know, having some time to just kind of briefly read what your child is watching and help ask your child a couple of questions when they're done can help them get the most out of those experiences. So I just wanted to highlight here, you know, we have a lot of, so much of the cultural narrative around digital media is like really parent blamey. You know, we're like, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it too much. You know, kids are doing it wrong. They're doing it too much. But really, like from some of the evidence base, I just wanted to share that the effect estimates are pretty small, especially when we look at digital media duration. So this is an R of minus 0.13. So that's a really small effect estimate in meta-analysis. The quality is actually associated with positive developmental outcomes with an R of 0.13. Co-viewing is actually associated with positive developmental outcomes of R of 0.16, but then the parent-child relationship is really associated with stronger kind of child developmental outcomes at 0.27. And so when families come into the clinic with a lot of friction around digital media use, it's not always about the digital media use. You know, there's usually some underlying kind of parent-child dynamic trickiness that should be addressed in the clinic, you know, and so it can be a point of contention, but making sure families feel seen and heard and that their relationship is strong and positive should be like one of the key pieces of that clinical encounter. And so some of the language in working with some of our psychologists, they're like that are really good at navigating these like tricky parent-child dynamics are like, you know, what would it take for you both to drop the rope? You know, like right now it feels like a tug of war. Like what would it take for us to meet in the middle and think through a plan together? So that language can sometimes be helpful, you know, like gosh, like digital media is designed for us to feel engaged and absorbed in it. You know, it's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just the way it's created. Like, and so what would it take for us to like find some middle ground and find a way to move forward? So what should we tell families based on this literature? You know, focusing on pro-social content from vetted sources, using other methods for soothing and calming. You know, I don't know if you guys have ever done zones of regulation with your kids or patients. It's like a really nice curriculum that kids can use to label their emotions. And if they're in certain emotions, they can make a plan to do a certain activity so that they can calm and soothe themselves. For kids who struggle more with regulation or executive functioning, you can consider helping them learn play or activities with more steps as compared with digital media like YouTube streaming that is more passive and is just, the algorithm is just feeding that content to them and they're not learning how to map out a plan for the day. And then again, you know, relationships really matter and asking caregivers to reflect on their own use and what their families are doing on their phone can help just create a modeling or a structure for that family, that the whole family that can share, and it's not just about the kids. Okay, and I'm going to end on this video here of Mr. Rogers.
Family and your friends will have your own arts festival and include whatever you like to do, such as drawing, or painting, or dancing, or dressing up, or singing, or cooking. There are many ways of saying who you are and how you feel. Ways that can be so helpful. Ways that don't hurt yourself or anybody else. You know, that's how you can tell when you're grown up inside. You're sure that what you're planning and doing are things that can be a real help to you and your neighbor. I'm proud of you, you know that. I hope you do.
So really, like, you know, there's like a lot of like this like really strong pro-social messaging. And it's, you know, some of the features of this video, you know, like he really talks directly to kids. You know, that's an element of pro-social positive content. It's really slow paced. So his calm demeanor, there's not a lot of action cuts or action shots, you know, and he's addressing, you know, some of the like lived experience of kids, you know, their internal life, that internal world can feel so confusing for a child. They really need support in understanding those feelings from a trusted caregiver. And so for a lot of us, you know, Mr. Rogers was this like trusted face on television that we could lean on to help us make meaning from those emotions, you know, growing up. So just one example of really high positive pro-social content that can make a big impact for kids. And we need more of that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next strand of development, which is language development. And I promise the other sections are a little bit shorter, so I won't take up too much time, and so we can have some time to like actually engage and have questions. So in terms of language development, it's again, there's some biological factors, that infants are programmed to learn language at birth, but speech acquisition occurs later due to those maturation of the vocal cords. Babbling occurs by around 8 to 9 months of age, and differentiation of language-specific patterns of babbling can happen by 10 months of age already. So these first 3 years are really rapid time of development because of that neuroplasticity, as you know, the synaptogenesis, and pruning and strengthening of synapses that are fired more often. But the commitment of the neural circuitry is really dependent on the exposures to the environment. And so we know that early experiences shape language behavior. This is the best time to be reading, talking, singing, just explaining the world to your kids, because they soak it up. Their brains love it. The first words too there's some social gatekeeping that happens. This first words are really dominated by their social worlds around them. So it might be dada or mama, or like a pet's name, or social routine. So really language is developed in a social way. And a responsive caregiver is really important to learn language. And joint attention is one mechanism that like young infants learn language. So if you're an adult, infants love to look at what you're holding, especially your parents. So they look more at that object. And that includes phones too. So if you're always holding your phone, infants are going to be more curious about it. They have an understanding that, an adult is having some communicative intent, that they're trying to talk to them, and they have this desire to imitate. And then the mere presence of a person in front of a TV helps them pay better attention to what that person is looking at too. So it's like a signal to the infants that, oh, I need to pay attention to what this person is looking at because it's going to be important. So infants are really socially wired to learn language in that way. So then what is the implication when we introduce digital media in that context? Infants 18 months and younger experience what we call transfer deficits. So they do these really elegant studies where they have somebody hiding a ball on TV behind like a curtain. They have that same person hiding a ball in person, and then they have their parents hiding that ball in person. And the infants can't find the ball when they watch it on TV, but they can find it, when their parents are hiding it like the best. And then they can also find it when an examiner is hiding it. And so what we know from the literature is that infants experience what we call cognitive constraints to learning from screens, absorbing that information, and then applying it to their real world experiences. And they also struggle to learn language from screens too. It's really this social gatekeeping again. And then background TV can disrupt those important kind of caregiver-child interactions and infant play. So what they did in this study was they had a waiting room where they turned on a background TV, and then they just watched parents and kids interact and play. They counted kind of like the amount of language that the parents spoke, and then how infants coded, how infants played. And it was just a little bit less from both the parents and the kids when there was a background TV involved. And then for kids older than 2 years of age, they still sometimes, in these toddler years, they still need their parents to actually help them transfer information from the screen to the real world. And digital media, again, can have both positive and negative effects. And that those effects are really bidirectional. So the quantity of digital media use is associated with poor language skills. And there's these longitudinal associations that are true as well. And then when programming is educational, or when kids co-view with caregivers, there's actually benefits to children's language skills. And then there's also, I love this study from Dr. Shu and her group, but she actually partnered with PBS Kids and National Science Foundation to develop and use some AI technology in children's media. So for instance, these are really, her team has like really tested and vetted these apps, but she partnered with, I don't know if you know Eleanor Knows, or that's the show on PBS. They took the character from that show. And for most shows, when somebody asks a kid a question, it's like, oh, like for instance, Dora the Explorer, she's like, and what did Boots steal? car or like, I don't know, some other object. And the child can answer and respond, but you don't know if the child is saying the right thing. And so it's really an open-ended question. It helps the kid reflect, but it can't say whether or not that child is correct or not. So what they did was they actually used AI technology to analyze children's language, and then they had a set like branch tree logic to spit out like a response based on what that child was saying that was accurate in response to the child. And then kids were actually able to learn more from the character as compared with just watching the show without these very specific questions asked. So I think there's a lot of exciting, innovative ways we can use technology when they're, again, designed with children at the heart of, the technology. Okay, so I'd like to share a little bit more results from our study about tablets and reading again. And so these, just to orient you again to the x-axis, these are some of the behaviors we coded for and frequency on the y-axis. And then blue is the kind of tablet with all the bells and whistles. Yellow is a tablet with just page turning capabilities. And then gray is the print book. So we coded for parent verbalizations when interacting over these 3 different experiences. And parents were actually making a lot more dialogic comments over a print book as compared to the other 2. And dialogic comments are really when you ask kids open-ended questions, or you try to make a connection from the book into a child's real life. Like, oh, remember that time we went to the zoo? Like, little critters going to the zoo with the grandma, what did we see at the zoo? So it's really about helping that child make meaningful connections to their real world experiences. And really a caregiver is going to know that child the best to be able to make those deep, strong connections. And then non-dialogic, that was just kind of any comment around any character of the book, like, look at that, or, that's a cat. And that was a little bit better for print compared to the basic book. And then parents just read the print book and the basic tablet more than the enhanced tablet, like as you might expect. Like the enhanced tablet is doing, if you're tapping it, it's kind of narrating some of the stuff for you. And then they had more format related verbalizations in the enhanced and basic compared to the print book. So those format related verbalizations were things like tap that or swipe that or turn the page. And partly because parents are orienting their kids to the tablet device, they might not have this inner working kind of knowledge as compared to a book that families feel a little bit more comfortable working around. And then there were just slightly more negative verbalizations from parents, like don't touch that or don't swipe that when it came to the tablet compared to the print. So still very little. You can see here our parents are overall very positive, but they were happening just a little bit more. And then interestingly, their kids were more off task for the print book. So tablet devices are designed to be engaging, right? It's visually salient stuff. And so kids just had more questions related to like, oh, when am I going to get my goldfish crackers, or when am I going to go home? But that is to be expected, for a toddler who's really curious about a lot of things in the world. We want them to be asking those questions and to be curious about not just what they're doing specifically, but to be curious about everything else in their environment. And then we also had similar results for child verbalizations. Kids had more book-related verbalizations in the print, more off-task verbalizations in the print, and then more total verbalizations. Okay, so why do we see effects between digital media use and language? The context is so important. It might be when used in excess, digital media might be supplanting or replacing other important developmental activities that are important for kids, like play or reading or sleep. And then the content, again, is like so important. Like most of the free and easily accessed content at kids' fingertips are less likely to have enriching language or opportunities for learning. And so like there's just, again, this mismatch between how digital media are created and how kids like to move through the world. So what can providers do? Again, focusing on content quality and ensuring ample opportunities for talking, playing, and reading, and prioritizing those language activities where possible. And if possible, watching together and co-viewing to help kids learn and understand concepts, and asking kids early and often about what they're seeing online in a really open-ended, non-judgmental way. Okay, I'm gonna pause there and see if there's any questions or comments before moving on to this next section. Great, we're almost there. There's not too much left. Okay, I'm gonna show this video here though. Sorry, have you guys seen this video before?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. They need to work on that, right? Yes. Okay. Did you understand it though? No. Huh? Oh, not this one. This is the grand finale of this. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they. Oh yeah. Right. Don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I said. Then was like, you know what I'm saying? No, in the world, but don't do that here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Really? I thought the same thing. I'm like, oh, that's crazy. Right.
I could watch them all day, but what were you guys noticing about those interactions and how that parent was relating to their child? You can just shout it out if you have any comments.
He was like copying so many of his gestures.
Yeah, there's this like, like when you see two people vibrate, like, oh, they kind of mirror each other, like, and so he was doing a lot of mirroring, a lot of like affirmation,
The baby's babbling was very fluent.
Yeah, you can tell that someone's been encouraging that, right? And so, when he responds to his baby, it is really encouraging him to talk more and develop more, and so that kind of back and forth, the serve and return interactions, they're brain food for kids, they're really nurturing that cognitive development, language development, and social emotional development. So yeah, anything else?
He's not using baby talk like he's.
Yeah, exactly. And he's going like, the baby's talking like a baby, but he's taking it one step above that zone of proximal development to help shape those kind of development towards the area that it's like, this is the next step for you,
They're taking the TV and making it like a joined activity, like talking about it together.
Yeah.
Oh, look at what he's doing. Oh, I wouldn't do that.
Right, totally. So yeah, it's really important to note that this is happening over a TV, like we have a lot of like, anxiety around like, what is this doing to our kids? But there's really some positive ways to be able to use digital media infused in our day-to-day too. Yeah, great point. Yeah, you guys hit on everything. And so really just to summarize this kind of video, that learning is a universal social function and kids benefit more from knowledgeable others who scaffold their skills in that zone of proximal development, and secure attachment is associated with stronger cognitive skills. And then of course, like mobility in infancy helps support exploration and curiosity and problem solving. And so kids learn from tactile experiences, they learn from embodied experiences. But digital media are not necessarily designed to be tactile embodied experiences. They're flat and two-dimensional. And so some of the things that they found is that the quantity of digital media viewing in this meta-analysis among kids 0 to 6 years of age was associated with less optimal cognitive outcomes. And then smartphone and tablet use for kids 1 to 5 years of age actually had no associations with cognition. So they didn't find any associations in that study for tablets and smartphones specifically. And then co-viewing was associated with greater cognitive benefits. And in this systematic review, they found that high quality educational apps can have a really beneficial impact on math and literacy skills. But these high quality educational apps have a lot of very specific learning goals. And often in the studies, there's like a teacher in the classroom that's helping kids learn from that app too. So again, it's not just about the media, it's about who that adult is in the room that's helping them transfer those skills from the digital media to the real world. And actually what they found in some of these studies is that when kids didn't have a baseline understanding of those concepts, if they were trying to learn it on a digital device, they couldn't learn it. They needed some sort of baseline level of understanding before they could learn those skills from a device and then be able to transfer it into the real world. So what can providers do? They can help encourage selection of high quality educational apps, but the App Store really is filled with things that are marketed as high quality educational apps. You know, they market towards parents' anxiety of like wanting to provide the best opportunity to kids. And so, but they're not highly vetted, you know, with children's developmental expertise involved in the creation of those apps. And then again, co-viewing and joint media engagement can be really helpful for kids. And for kids who have a hard time playing outside of digital media, trying to do regular outings to the library, playground, or community center, involving teachers, you know, to think about what kids like to play within school so that they can infuse more of that in the home space. And thinking of games that parents like to play themselves when they're a kid and kind of infusing their day-to-day with that if at all possible. Okay. I'm going to briefly go through physical development here, but we know that opportunities for physical activity in early childhood is really important. And sleep is also a really important aspect of physical development that aids in emotion regulation, learning, and attention. And we know that screen media is associated with greater risk of adiposity because it could be supplanting opportunities for physical activity. There's also a lot of like high caloric density advertisements that might prime people to those food cues are really salient for us as people, you know. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense to be like, oh, there's a food there. Like I need to remember where that is. And so it could prime kids for greater intake. And then also, while there's sometimes TV on in the background, it's easy to snack and not attend to your internal cues or signals of satiety. There's mixed findings regarding tablet use and fine motor development. Some studies suggest that the pinching mechanism actually is associated with more advanced fine motor development. And then also there's a study published in JAMA Pediatrics that found that there's some risk of development of myopia, you know, with greater excessive tablet use. And then one study published in Pediatrics found that there's a lot of preschoolers that actually access their tablet in the middle of the night. So having a tablet in the that's so, you know, it's so tempting on the bedstand. It can interrupt sleep onset and contribute to prolonged nighttime awakenings too. So what can providers do? We can discuss media in the context of daily routines, you know, because they're happening in daily routines. Find replacement strategies for use during meal times and bedtime, and avoid, if at all possible, keeping TVs and tablets in the rooms that kids are sleeping in, or setting do not disturb or downtime settings in the evenings can help. And then avoiding highly commercialized content, which might have more food-based advertisements, and taking digital media breaks to reduce the risk of myopia. So that was a big summary of our literature, but there's a lot of loose threads still. You know, much of the evidence continues to focus on screen time because it's the easiest way to understand, you know, screen media, but we need creative methods and innovative methods that match how immersive and business-oriented these technologies are. And we also need to better understand the psychosocial drivers of digital media use, that it's not just about the media, it's about what that parent or child has access to in their day-to-day that can help with their opportunities for success and thriving. And then we need more interventional work to understand, like, how can we help kids who develop problematic media use habits? Like, how can we help intervene and understand more about those individual characteristics that contribute? So tying all these strands together, you know, really like a big picture overview is that we should focus on these supportive relationships, facilitate open-ended communication around digital media. High quality screen media can be a part of the mixed day-to-day as long as the really key building blocks of childhood are there, including sleep, play, movement, reading, and connection with family. And then trying to promote emotion regulation strategies in non-digital ways. So I'll share some resources, you know, for you to consider as a part of your kind of clinical care. The AAP has this family media plan that you can, have you guys seen this before? And okay, so a lot of head nods, but you can put in the age of your kids and the family members. And it's nice because they force parents to also think about their own digital media use and create a rule or plan that fits for the whole family. And every family is different and has different priorities. So it helps you think through the goals and priorities, some of the balance, you know, and all of the things that families can consider here with creating those rules and boundaries. And then, you know, with technology, there's also all of these advancements in how to monitor digital monitoring tools. Google Family Link can help families keep a better, closer eye on screen time and what kids are playing, and then also kind of lock down those devices after a certain time. And then the AEP Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health has a ton of resources online, including interactive toolkits that you can give out to families, interactive question and answer portal. And then they have this 5 C's of digital media use to think through, like in the clinic, you know, these are the 5 things that I should think through when I'm with a family. You know, who is that child? What do they bring to the table? What kind of content are they viewing? How are they using digital media to calm or soothe themselves? What is it crowding out, or what is it supplanting? And then how do I, as a parent, you know, help facilitate open-ended communication with kids so that they're ready to support problem solving? These are some activity cards that help kids and families have open-ended discussions. So they're like games that you can play with the kids, or open-ended questions that families can try out with their families. These are my kids watching screens right here. This is the most less fighting that they ever are. They're like the most happy, like when they're together, cozied up with the screen. So, all right, I think we're at the hour. I'm sorry to take us to the hour, but are there any questions or anything I can help answer?
Okay, we got one here in the Q&A. The parental controls for content are sometimes largely ineffective. Do you have one that you recommend?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think part of it is like the business model of digital media doesn't want you to control what your kids are watching, right? And so some of the, like Apple screen time kind of falls short, and so does Google Family Link. The best one that I've seen reviewed has been Bark. They use it like oversees a lot of different apps, and you can set different ways to be notified depending on kind of your level of concern, and it will use AI to filter through like the actual, like what is it that kids are chatting and actually viewing that Google Family Link and Apple iOS just doesn't get into, you know, those nitty-gritty details. They get at this high level overview. So that's one thing that I've been recommending to patients, but I haven't personally tried it. That's like on my list of to-dos of like, I need to try this app to see like if it actually helps or how well it works. And then I think the other thing that they have is they have these devices, they're like magnetic devices actually, called bricks, that you can tap that device to close out the apps that you don't want to use on your phone. They also have like, there's this Grow app that if you download the app, it will start to grow a tree on your screen. And the more time you spend offline, it grows a bigger and bigger tree. And after so many hours, they'll actually plant a tree in real life for you. And so that's like one app that I think can help with some of that management of screen time alone. But you're right, it doesn't quite get at the content of what kids are viewing.
But you Google Bark dash parental control, that come up.
Yes, yeah, thank you, yes.